Well, well, look at this. Another old black man who thinks Pinewood Drive belongs to him. Simmons said it with a smile, the kind of smile that knows exactly what it's doing. Then he reached out, no warning, no hesitation, and ripped the cane straight out of Clarence Webb's hand. Threw it, not dropped it, threw it. Like a piece of garbage he was done looking at. The cane skidded across the wet pavement and spun to a stop against the curb. Clarence stumbled. His shoulder hit the brick wall hard. His hand scraped the mortar, trying to hold himself upright. Simmons stepped closer, looked him up and down slowly. "What's the matter? Can't stand on your own 2 feet without that thing? Maybe you're just too old to be out here walking around like you own the place." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then he leaned in until his face was inches from Clarence's ear. "You know what your problem is? You people never know when you're not wanted. Never did. Never will." The sidewalk went completely silent. A woman nearby pressed her hand over her mouth. A teenage boy on a bicycle stopped pedaling and just stared. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. That officer had absolutely no idea what he had just set into motion, and by the time he found out, it was already far too late. Don't you dare scroll past this one. This story goes somewhere nobody saw coming. Stay until the very end. Drop your location and local time in the comments right now. We want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe, because what comes next will stay with you. To understand what happened on that sidewalk on a Tuesday morning in October, you have to understand the street first. Pinewood Drive, Hartwell, South Carolina. It was the kind of street that didn't make the news, the kind that didn't need to. A long, quiet stretch of road lined on both sides by tall pine trees that had been standing since before most of the people living beneath them were born. The kind of street where neighbors still knew each other's names. Not just the names on the mailboxes, but the names of the children, the grandchildren, the dogs, the cats, and the stories behind every front porch decoration. The houses here were modest, clean, well-kept. Small American flags hung from some of the porches. Wind chimes sang from others. On Sunday mornings, the smell of fried chicken and fresh-baked cornbread drifted through open windows and screen doors and settled over the whole block like a warm hand. This was not a neighborhood that expected trouble, and at the far end of Pinewood Drive, set back just slightly from the road behind a low iron fence and a bed of marigolds, sat a brown brick house with a wide front porch and a rocking chair that had seen better decades. Above the porch, hanging from a rusted hook that nobody had ever gotten around to replacing, was a wind chime made of copper pipe and fishing line, handmade, a little uneven. Still singing, Clarence Webb's late wife, Dorothy, had made it herself the summer of 1991. She'd seen the design in a magazine, bought the materials at the hardware store on Route 9, and spent an entire Saturday afternoon at the kitchen table measuring and cutting and tying knots, while Clarence sat across from her pretending to read the newspaper and actually just watching her work. She hung it before dinner. It had been singing ever since. Dorothy had been gone 11 years now. The wind chime stayed. Clarence Otis Webb was 76 years old. Tall, or he had been, before the years began their quiet negotiations with his spine. Still broad across the shoulders, silver-haired, close-cropped, with a face that had settled into the kind of dignified stillness that only comes from a life fully and honestly lived. His hands were large and slightly stiff with arthritis, particularly the right one, particularly in the mornings before the joints had time to warm up. He had spent 34 years as a high school principal, first at Hartwell Preparatory, then for the last 19 years of his career at Calhoun County High. where he had overseen the graduation of more than 4,200 students. He knew their names, not all of them, but more than anyone believed possible. Former students still stopped him on the street to shake his hand, to introduce him to their children, to tell him about the speech he gave at their commencement that they still thought about on hard days. He had retired 7 years ago. He did not slow down. Every Saturday morning he ran a free tutoring session for middle schoolers out of the Hartwell Community Center. Every third Thursday he sat on the neighborhood watch board. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, without exception, rain or shine, he walked the 3 blocks from his front door down Pinewood Drive, left on Sycamore, and straight to Deacon's Corner Store, where he bought a newspaper, a small black coffee in a paper cup, and sometimes, if the mood struck him, a pack of peppermint candies that he distributed to anyone he ran into on the walk home. He had been making this walk for 22 years. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every tree root that had lifted the concrete half an inch and needed watching, every neighbor whose light came on early and whose came on late. He knew Mrs. Harriet Monroe across the street, 71 years old, who waved at him from her porch every single morning with the same cup of tea in her hand and the same blue housecoat on her shoulders. 30 years of friendship communicated entirely through a morning wave and a nod. He knew Reverend Samuel Briggs, who drove his blue Dodge pickup down Pinewood every Tuesday on his way to the church, and who always tapped the horn twice when he passed. 2 short beeps that meant good morning, I see you, have a blessed day. He knew this street the way you can only know a place after nearly 4 decades of walking its sidewalks, watching its children grow up, attending its funerals, celebrating its weddings, and sweeping its leaves off your porch on October mornings when the wind pushed them up against the iron fence. This was his street. Had been for 38 years. On his mantel, between a photograph of Dorothy in her Sunday best and a framed drawing his youngest granddaughter had made when she was 5, a lopsided house with a yellow sun in the corner and the words "Granddad's house" spelled out in purple crayon, sat a photograph that had been there for 3 years. A large, framed print, professional quality, a tall black man in full police dress uniform, standing at a podium in front of the Hartwell City Council chambers, shaking the mayor's hand. The nameplate on the podium read, Chief of Police Dominic Webb, his son, his boy. 47 years old and the Chief of Police of Hartwell, South Carolina. But you wouldn't know any of that just by looking at Clarence Webb walking down Pinewood Drive on a Tuesday morning in October. You wouldn't know about the 4,200 graduates. You wouldn't know about the tutoring sessions or the neighborhood watch meetings or the 22 years of the same walk to the same corner store. You wouldn't know about Dorothy or the wind chime or the purple crayon drawing. All you would see was an old black man with a cane and a worn jacket and a small leather notebook in his pocket, walking slowly and carefully along the left side of the sidewalk, the way he always did, because the tree roots on the right side had gotten worse this year, and he didn't trust them. That was all Officer Brett Simmons saw, and that, he decided, was enough. 3 blocks away from Clarence's front door, a black and white patrol car sat idling at the corner of Pinewood and Sycamore. Inside, Officer Brett Simmons was behind the wheel. 31 years old, white, 5 years on the Hartwell Police Department. Built like a man who treated the gym as a second office. Wide shoulders, thick neck, jaw set at a permanent angle that suggested he was always prepared to be argued with. He wore his sunglasses even on overcast mornings. He wore them the way some men wear a scowl. Not because they needed to, but because it made a point. His partner, Officer Dale Hutchins, sat in the passenger seat. 27, quieter. The kind of officer who filled out his paperwork neatly and kept his opinions to himself and told himself that keeping his opinions to himself was a form of professionalism. Simmons was talking. He was always talking. You see this neighborhood? He was leaning slightly forward, scanning the street through the windshield, the way a man scans a room he's decided he owns. Used to be a nice area, clean, quiet. Now every time I come through here, it's like a different place. Hutchins said nothing. He looked out the passenger window. I pulled a guy over on this street 3 weeks ago, Simmons continued. Broad daylight. Asked him where he was going. You know what he said? He said, I don't have to tell you that. He shook his head slowly. 3 weeks ago, I haven't forgotten it. Hutchins shifted in his seat, kept looking out the window. Then Simmons straightened up. At the far end of the block, a figure had turned the corner from Pinewood Drive onto Sycamore. An older man, tall but moving carefully, one hand on a wooden cane, the other tucked into the pocket of a brown jacket. He was walking on the left side of the sidewalk, slowly, steadily, going about his morning. Simmons watched him for exactly 4 seconds. Watch this, he said. Hutchins turned. He's just walking. Simmons put the car in drive. The patrol car rolled forward slowly, the way a shadow moves across a wall. Quiet, deliberate, and impossible to stop once it starts moving. Clarence heard the engine before he saw the car. He glanced over his shoulder, saw the black and white, and did what he had always done, what he had taught his students to do, what he had told his own son to do on the day Dominic left for the police academy 22 years ago. He slowed his pace, made himself visible, kept his hands easy and in sight. The patrol car pulled up alongside him and stopped. The window came down. Simmons looked at him for a moment without speaking. The sunglasses made it impossible to read his eyes, but the set of his jaw said everything. Hey, stop right there. Where are you going? Clarence stopped. He turned toward the car slowly, the way a man turns when he has nothing to hide and every reason to be careful anyway. Good morning, officer. His voice was level, warm, even. The voice of a man who had spent 34 years speaking calmly in rooms full of people who were anything but calm. I'm just walking to Deacon's Corner store. It's right up on Birch. I make this walk every Tuesday and Friday morning. Simmons stared at him. You got ID on you? Yes, sir. May I reach into my jacket pocket? My wallet is right inside. Slowly, Clarence moved his hand with the exaggerated deliberateness of a man who understood exactly what that instruction meant and exactly why it was necessary. He opened his jacket with 2 fingers, pulled out his wallet, removed his driver's license, and held it out toward the window. Simmons took it. Didn't say thank you. Looked at it for a moment, then looked back at Clarence. You live around here? Yes, sir. 38 years. My house is the brown brick at the end of Pinewood. Number 412. Simmons looked down the street in the direction Clarence had indicated, then back at him. Wait here. He rolled the window up and pulled the car to the curb, got out, walked to the front of the patrol car, and leaned against the hood with Clarence's license in his hand, running it through the system on his handheld. Clarence stood on the sidewalk, both hands visible, his cane in his right hand. The morning air was cool and smelled like pine and damp concrete. A mockingbird was working through its repertoire somewhere in the trees overhead. 2 doors down, a man in a delivery uniform was loading boxes into a truck and glancing over occasionally, curious. The system came back, clean, completely clean. No warrants, no violations, no criminal record of any kind. The car that the license was registered to, a 2016 navy blue sedan, was legally parked in the driveway at 412 Pinewood Drive, just as Clarence had said. Everything matched. Everything checked out. Not so much as an unpaid parking ticket in 15 years. Any reasonable officer would have handed the license back, said sorry for the inconvenience, and moved on with the morning. Simmons walked back toward Clarence. Slower this time. His jaw was set harder than before. He stopped a foot away, looked Clarence up and down. You know what triggered this stop? Clarence met his eyes steadily. No, sir. I don't believe I do. Simmons tilted his head slightly. You were walking on the left side of the sidewalk. That's inconsistent with normal foot traffic patterns. That kind of behavior draws attention. Clarence looked at him for one long moment. There were no words for what he had just heard. Not because it was threatening, because it was so profoundly, absurdly meaningless that his mind needed a full second to confirm that a uniformed officer had actually just said it out loud. But before he could respond, Simmons took one step closer, and everything shifted. Hands on the wall. As Simmons said it the way men say things when they've already decided what's going to happen next, and the words are just a formality. He gestured with 2 fingers toward the brick wall of Deacon's corner store, 10 feet away. The morning light caught the badge on his chest and threw a small, bright point across the wet sidewalk. Clarence didn't move immediately, not out of defiance, out of disbelief. Officer, he said, keeping his voice exactly as steady as it had been since the beginning of this conversation. May I ask what this is about? My ID is clean. I've told you where I live. I've told you where I'm going. I have done nothing wrong. Hands on the wall. Each word its own sentence, his voice dropping lower with each one. I won't ask again. By now, the sidewalk had accumulated witnesses the way a slow accident accumulates traffic. A young woman pushing a stroller had stopped completely, 1 foot on the curb, watching. A teenager on a bicycle had planted both feet on the pavement and was staring without bothering to pretend he wasn't. The delivery driver 2 doors down had stopped loading his truck, and from across the street, through the window of the house with the blue shutters, a curtain moved. Harriet Monroe had been on her way to her own front porch with her morning tea when she heard the patrol car pull up. She had reached the sidewalk just in time to see Simmons take Clarence's license. She had been standing there ever since, her tea going cold in her hand, her stomach tightening with every passing second. She knew Clarence Webb, had known him for 30 years, had watched him shovel snow off the sidewalk in front of her house without being asked, had received casseroles from him every time she was sick, had sat in the front row of Dorothy's funeral and held his hand through the whole service. She watched him place his palms flat against the brick wall of the corner store, his right hand, the arthritic one, pressed against the rough surface and trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding the position while the joints in his knuckles protested the cold and the pressure. His cane rested against his hip, held loosely between his elbow and his ribs, because he had nowhere else to put it. Simmons approached him from behind. Close. Too close. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done this before and never faced a consequence for it. He patted Clarence down. Shoulders first, then sides, then the jacket pockets. His hand closed around the small leather notebook in the left breast pocket. He pulled it out. It was old, soft at the corners from years of handling. Brown leather, about the size of a paperback, held closed by a thin strap looped over a small brass button. On the inside cover, in handwriting that was not Clarence's, rounder, more deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had learned penmanship in a school that still cared about such things, was a single sentence. Wherever you go today, remember that I am proud of you. Always. Dorothy. Simmons flipped the notebook open with one hand, turned a few pages. His expression didn't change. His eyes moved across the entries, meeting notes, phone numbers, a grocery list, a passage from Psalms copied out in Clarence's careful block print, and registered nothing. No recognition, no hesitation. He closed the notebook and dropped it into the puddle at his feet. Not placed it, not set it down. Dropped it, with a small flick of his wrist, the way you discard something you've already decided has no value. The notebook hit the water and splayed open. The pages absorbed the puddle immediately, darkening from the edges inward. The ink on Dorothy's inscription began to bleed and blur. Clarence heard the sound of it hitting the water. He didn't turn around. He stood with his palms flat against the brick wall and stared straight ahead at the pine tree across the street and breathed in slow, measured counts. In for 4, out for 4. The way he used to calm himself before difficult parent meetings. The way he had taught his students to breathe when the world felt like it was pressing in too close. Behind him, Harriet Monroe made a sound, a short, involuntary intake of breath, as if she'd been struck. Her tea was completely cold now. Her hand was shaking. She reached into the pocket of her housecoat and pulled out her phone. At the corner of Sycamore and Birch, a blue Dodge pickup had slowed to a stop. Reverend Samuel Briggs had been on his way to the church when the flashing lights caught his eye in the rearview mirror. He had pulled to the curb, engine idling, and rolled down his window to see better. What he saw made him turn the engine off entirely. He reached for his phone, opened the camera, and pressed record. The small red dot blinked in the corner of the screen. Back at the wall, Simmons had moved to Clarence's right jacket pocket. He pulled out the reading glasses case, snapped it open, looked at the glasses inside as if they might be concealing something, then set the case on the hood of the patrol car, with enough carelessness that it slid immediately to the edge and tipped off, the glasses tumbling out and skidding across the hood. One lens caught the corner of the hood and cracked. Then a young man stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered. 22 years old, broad-shouldered, in a college sweatshirt, with the careful expression of someone trying to do the right thing without escalating anything. He reached down and picked up Clarence's cane, which had fallen when Simmons grabbed his jacket, and held it out toward the old man. "Sir, here's your—" Simmons moved between them so fast, the young man actually took a step back, chest to chest, badge inches from the young man's face. Put it down right now, or I will charge you with interfering with an active investigation. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The young man's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Simmons to Clarence and back. He set the cane down on the pavement slowly, hands raised. The cane lay on the wet sidewalk. Clarence could not reach it. His palms were still flat against the brick wall. His notebook was still open in the puddle behind him. Dorothy's words still bleeding slowly into the water. And Officer Brett Simmons had found absolutely nothing. Not a thing. Not a weapon. Not a substance. Not a single item that was out of place. Just the belongings of a 76-year-old man on his way to buy a newspaper. Simmons stood behind him for a long moment. You could see it in the set of his shoulders. The frustration of a man whose story is not matching the ending he had already written in his head. He leaned in close to Clarence's ear. His voice dropped to something almost private. "You think you're something special, don't you? Think because you're old I'm supposed to give you a pass? This is my street, and everybody on it answers to me, including you." Clarence said nothing. He stared at the pine tree across the road. He breathed in for 4 and out for 4, and he waited. Simmons circled Clarence the way a man circles something he hasn't decided what to do with yet. Slow, deliberate. His boots scraped against the wet pavement with every step. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. Nobody had left. A few more people had stopped. A woman in scrubs on her way to an early shift. An older white man in a cardigan who had come out of the dry cleaners next door and was now standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching with the expression of someone who knows exactly what they're seeing and cannot believe they are seeing it. Reverend Briggs's phone was still recording from the corner, the red dot still blinking. Harriet Monroe had moved closer, stopping just at the edge of the small crowd, her cold tea still in her hand, her eyes never leaving Clarence's back. Simmons stopped directly behind Clarence. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, the kind that is just pressure wearing a different face. "You know what your problem is?" he said finally. Clarence said nothing. "In for 4, out for 4. Your problem is you think the rules are different for you. You think you can just walk around like this neighborhood owes you something." He paused. "You've been uncooperative since the moment I stopped you." Clarence turned his head slightly to the side, not enough to look at Simmons directly, just enough to be heard clearly. "Officer, I have answered every question you asked me. I gave you my identification without hesitation. I stood against this wall while you searched my jacket. I have not raised my voice. I have not made a single aggressive movement." Each sentence arrived flat and precise, like a series of documented facts being read into a record. "I have done everything you asked. Everything." "Are you talking back to me right now?" "I am stating what happened. Those are not the same thing." The air on the sidewalk changed. It was almost imperceptible, a collective tightening, the way a room full of people draws breath simultaneously before something breaks. The woman in scrubs took one small step backward. The young man in the college sweatshirt, still standing where Simmons had chest-blocked him minutes earlier, went completely still. Simmons stepped forward. His hand came out fast. Not a grab exactly, more of a clamp, his fingers closing around Clarence's right arm just below the shoulder, right where the joint was thickest and most inflamed from the arthritis that had been working at it for the past 12 years. The pain was immediate and total. Clarence cried out, a short, sharp sound, involuntary, the kind of sound a body makes when it is genuinely surprised by pain before the mind has time to suppress it. His knees buckled slightly. His free hand shot out toward the wall to stabilize himself, palm scraping brick. "You're coming with me, officer. My arm. I have arthritis in that joint. Please, should have thought about that before you decided to run your mouth." He pulled. Clarence's feet moved in short, stumbling steps, trying to keep pace, trying to stay upright, trying to negotiate between the grip on his arm and the absence of his cane and the wet pavement beneath his shoes. The crowd reacted, not with movement, with sound. A low, collective murmur that traveled through the gathered people the way a shudder travels through a single body. Reverend Briggs stepped out of his truck. He kept the phone raised. His voice was calm, but it carried. "Officer, that man is 76 years old. You are hurting him. Please stop." Simmons's head turned toward him. His eyes behind the sunglasses were flat and hard. "Back up, right now. You are interfering with an active arrest. I am standing on a public sidewalk recording a public interaction. One more word, and I will put you in cuffs too. Back up." Briggs raised his free hand, palm open. He took one step back. The phone stayed up. The red dot kept blinking. He was not going anywhere. Simmons turned back to Clarence. He walked him the last few steps to the patrol car and pressed him forward against the rear panel. The metal was cold from the morning air, and Clarence flinched when his chest made contact with it, the thin fabric of his jacket doing nothing against the hard surface. "Hands behind your back." "Please, what am I being charged with?" I have not done anything. Obstruction. Resisting arrest. Hands. Now. Obstruction. He had been standing against a wall answering questions. Resisting arrest. He had stumbled because a man grabbed his arthritic arm without warning. Both charges assembled from nothing, on the spot, by a man who needed a reason and had run out of patience waiting to find one. The first cuff went on the left wrist. The metal clicked shut. Too tight. Immediately too tight, biting into the swollen tissue around the joint. Clarence bit down hard on the inside of his cheek. The second cuff. Right wrist. The arthritic one. The one that had already been screaming since Simmons grabbed it minutes ago. Click. He did not make a sound this time. He had used his one involuntary sound already. What was left now was just endurance. The quiet, absolute endurance of a man who had survived harder things than this, and knew, with complete certainty, that the truth was still true regardless of who was currently ignoring it. Simmons opened the rear door. Clarence ducked his head and folded himself into the back seat, moving carefully, his cuffed hands useless behind him, his cane still lying on the wet pavement where the young man had set it down. Through the window, he could see it, just lying there, beside the open notebook with Dorothy's words bleeding slowly into the puddle, beside the cracked glasses, beside the newspaper he had never made it to the store to buy. In the front seat, Hutchins picked up the radio. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. One in custody. Black male, approximately 75. Corner of Sycamore and Birch. Charges, obstruction, resisting arrest." The message was logged, time-stamped, recorded. Clarence closed his eyes. The cuffs throbbed against his wrists with every heartbeat. He said one word. Barely a sound, just the shape of a name on his lips. Dominic. The Hartwell Police Department sat on the corner of Grant Avenue and 5th Street, a flat-roofed building of pale brick and tinted glass that had been built in 1987 and renovated once, superficially, in 2009. The fluorescent lights in the booking area buzzed at a frequency that after 20 minutes began to feel like something pressing lightly but continuously against the inside of your skull. The floor was linoleum, gray-white, scuffed along the path from the entrance to the processing desk by 20 years of foot traffic. The room smelled like burnt coffee, floor disinfectant, and the particular staleness of air that never quite makes it to a window. Sergeant Lou Abrams had been behind the front desk for 22 years. He had seen every kind of person walk through that side entrance. He had processed arrests of every variety: domestic incidents, DUIs, assaults, thefts, drug charges. He had seen people come in crying, and people come in fighting, and people come in so numb they barely registered where they were. He had never seen a 76-year-old man in a pressed brown jacket and church trousers, one knee torn, both wrists cuffed behind his back. No cane, no glasses. A bruise already darkening on his right forearm where someone's fingers had been. Abrams looked at Simmons. Charges? Obstruction. Resisting arrest. Simmons set the paperwork on the counter with the practiced ease of a man completing a routine task. Open and shut. Abrams looked at Clarence again. At the torn trouser knee. At the wrists. At the way the old man was holding himself perfectly upright despite everything. Spine straight, chin level, eyes clear. The posture of a man who had decided that dignity was the one thing in this room that nobody could process or log or take away from him. Something turned over quietly in Abrams's stomach. He wrote it down. They walked Clarence to the metal bench along the far wall of the holding area and removed one cuff to secure him with the standard procedure, then recuffed both hands in front of him. Marginally more comfortable, which was not saying much. The bench was cold steel, bolted to the wall, no cushion. The fluorescent light directly above it flickered every 40 seconds with the reliability of a slow clock. His bare right hand rested on his knee. The wrist was visibly swollen now, the skin tight and shiny around the joint. A red ring encircled it where the cuff had bitten in. His left wrist matched it almost exactly. He sat without moving, without speaking. He looked at the far wall and counted the cinder blocks, something he had done as a young man in difficult meetings, when the words around him were going badly and he needed his mind to stay level. Something to count. Something concrete and reliable in a room full of variables. 47 cinder blocks to the far wall. He counted them twice to be sure. He thought about Dorothy, about the notebook in the puddle, about whether the ink was completely gone by now, or whether some of it had survived, whether some fragment of her handwriting, some piece of the curve of her letters, was still legible on the wet page. He thought about the wind chime on the porch, singing to an empty street. He thought about his son. Across the room, Simmons was at his desk filling out the arrest report. His pen moved quickly, confidently. The report described a subject exhibiting suspicious behavior, specifically walking on the non-standard left side of the pedestrian walkway in a manner inconsistent with normal foot traffic patterns. It described the subject as verbally uncooperative and resistant to lawful commands. It described the arrest as a necessary response to escalating non-compliance. Every sentence was constructed carefully. Every sentence was, in its own way, a small act of fiction. After 35 minutes, Clarence spoke for the first time since entering the building. "May I please make a phone call?" Simmons didn't look up from his paperwork. "When I'm done." Clarence nodded once, went back to counting cinder blocks. 12 more minutes passed. Sergeant Abrams from across the room caught Clarence's eye once during those 12 minutes, just briefly. The look on Abrams's face was not unkind. It was the look of a man who knows that what is happening in front of him is wrong and has not yet decided what to do about that knowledge. He looked away first. Finally, Simmons pushed back from his desk. He walked to the holding area, reached into his uniform pocket, and produced Clarence's belongings: wallet, reading glasses case with the cracked lens, and the leather notebook, still damp, its pages warped and rippled from the puddle. Dorothy's inscription on the inside cover now a gray watercolor smear of what it had been. He set them on the bench beside Clarence. Then he reached into his other pocket. He placed Clarence's driver's license on the bench. Then he picked it back up. He slid it into his breast pocket without a word and walked back toward his desk. Clarence watched this. He said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "Officer, that is my identification." Simmons sat down, picked up his coffee. "I'd like my license back, please." Simmons took a sip, set the cup down, began typing. Clarence waited 30 seconds. "Officer, my driver's license. I need it returned to me." Nothing. Another 40 seconds. "Sir, I am asking you to return my identification." Simmons reached into his breast pocket without looking up, pulled out the license, and tossed it sideways onto the bench beside Clarence. It skidded off the edge and fell to the floor. Clarence bent slowly, hands still cuffed in front of him, and picked it up. He was finally handed a phone. He dialed slowly. The same number he had called every Sunday evening for 25 years. Since the day Dominic left for the academy and made him promise to keep the line open. 2 rings. "Dad?" Clarence's voice did not crack. It did not need to. The words themselves carried everything. He told his son what had happened, quietly, precisely, without embellishment and without omission. Under 2 minutes, on the other end of the line, Chief Dominic Webb said nothing for 6 full seconds. When he spoke, his voice was the quietest it had ever been. "Don't say another word to anyone. I'm coming, Dad." He hung up, and in the next 30 seconds, made one phone call that set everything into motion. Deputy Chief Patricia Horn was in the middle of a budget review when her phone rang. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. First ring felt reactive. Third ring felt negligent. Second ring was the professional middle ground she had maintained for 23 years in law enforcement. She listened for 45 seconds without speaking. Then she stood up, closed her laptop, picked up her keys and her badge, and was out of her office in 15 seconds flat. She arrived at the Hartwell Police Department 19 minutes later. She had made a 25-minute drive in 19 minutes. Nobody asked how. She walked through the front entrance with the kind of stride that makes hallways feel narrower. Past the front desk, where Abrams looked up and read everything he needed to read in her expression. Past the corridor that led to the patrol briefing room. Straight to the booking area. And there he was, Clarence Otis Webb, sitting on a metal bench under a flickering fluorescent light. Cuffs removed now, but wrists still raw, the red rings still visible on both joints. His right wrist swollen, his trouser knee still torn, his notebook, warped and water-damaged, sitting beside him on the bench, his jacket wrinkled in the places where someone had grabbed it. Patricia Horn had met Clarence Webb at 11 department ceremonies over the past 5 years. He had been in the front row at every one, the same front row seat, same pressed jacket, same quiet dignity, and he had applauded louder than anyone in the room when Dominic crossed the stage or shook a hand or received a commendation. He had never asked for recognition, had never traded on his son's position for so much as a reserved parking space. She stood in the doorway of the holding area for exactly 2 seconds. Then she crossed the room and knelt in front of him. "Mr. Webb." Her voice came out lower than she intended, steadier than she felt. "I am so sorry. We are getting you out of here right now." Clarence looked at her. His eyes were clear and calm and exhausted in the way that eyes get when they have been holding everything together for a long time and have just been given permission to set it down. He put his hand over hers once. Brief, then let go. She stood, turned to Abrams. "Get those cuffs off completely. Find him a chair with a back on it. Find him something to drink." She paused. "And find him a cane. There should be a lost and found somewhere in this building." Abrams was already moving. She turned back toward the corridor. "Where is Simmons?" "Break room." "Get him in my office, right now. Not in 5 minutes, right now." She walked down the hall. Her footsteps were even and unhurried. The walls, if they were paying attention, were paying attention. Simmons came into her office 2 minutes later, coffee in hand, chin forward. The half-smirk that was less an expression and more a default setting. The face of a man who had walked out of difficult conversations before and expected to walk out of this one the same way. He dropped into the chair across from her desk without being invited. "You wanted to see me, Deputy Chief?" Horn was standing behind her desk. She did not sit. She looked at him for a moment with the particular quality of stillness that experienced officers develop. The stillness that means they have already gathered more information than you realize and are now simply deciding where to begin. "Tell me about the stop this morning, Sycamore and Birch." Simmons shrugged, set his coffee on the edge of the desk. "Routine stop. Observed a subject displaying suspicious pedestrian behavior in a residential area. Subject was uncooperative during questioning, became verbally resistant, refused to comply with lawful commands, placed under arrest. Standard procedure." Horn let the silence sit for 5 full seconds. "What was the suspicious behavior?" Subject was walking on the non-standard left side of the... There is no standard side of a sidewalk, Simmons. There is no ordinance, no statute, no regulation, municipal, county, or state, that designates a required walking direction for pedestrians on a sidewalk. You know that. Simmons's jaw tightened slightly. Officer discretion. Do you know who that man is? The question landed differently than he expected. He stopped. His eyes moved across her face, reading it, and finding something there that hadn't been there in previous difficult conversations. I know he's a local resident. 38 years on Pinewood, he said. I couldn't verify. His name is Clarence Otis Webb. She paused. Let the name sit in the air of the room for a moment. He is the father of Chief Dominic Webb. The coffee cup stopped moving. The smirk did not fade gradually. It collapsed, all at once like a structure that had lost its central support. And what replaced it was not quite fear and not quite shame, but something that lived in the territory between them. There was no way I could have known. Let me stop you there. Her voice dropped. Every word arrived with the weight of something carefully chosen. Even if that man had no connection to this department, even if he had no son, no history, no name that anyone in this building recognized, you grabbed a 76-year-old man by his arthritic arm on a public sidewalk. You threw his personal belongings into a puddle. You allowed his mobility aid to lie on the ground and prevented a bystander from returning it to him. You handcuffed him on fabricated charges in front of a crowd of witnesses, and you withheld his personal identification for sport. She straightened. Any one of those things ends your career. All of them together means you won't be wearing that badge anywhere in this country again. Simmons opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Badge, she said. Service weapon. On this desk. His hands moved to his belt. They were not steady. The badge came loose and he set it on the desk, and the small metallic sound it made seemed too quiet for what it represented. 5 years of authority, of stops made without consequence, of complaints filed and buried and forgotten, all of it reduced to a small piece of metal sitting on a deputy chief's desk on a Tuesday morning. The gun followed. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will not contact Mr. Webb. You will not contact any witness. Internal Affairs and the State Attorney General's office will handle this personally. She pressed the intercom. Send 2 officers to my office and pull Officer Hutchins from patrol. He's suspended too. 2 officers. Simmons stood, his legs held barely. I have a union. I have rights. Your union can't unsee dash cam footage. Your union can't unhear what you said to Hutchins before you opened that car door. Your union can't unfind the 16 complaints in your personnel file. She looked at him with an expression that was neither angry nor satisfied, just clear. You buried yourself this morning, Simmons. All I'm doing is marking the spot. 2 officers appeared at the door. Simmons looked at the badge on the desk one last time. Then he looked at the floor. He walked out between them, past the break room where his coffee was still warm, past the front desk where Abrams watched in silence, past the door he had walked through 500 times with his chin up. This time, his head was down. Back in the waiting area, Clarence sat in a proper chair now, one with a back on it, a small concession to basic dignity that should never have needed to be a concession at all. A cup of water in his cuffed free hands. Someone had found a cane in the lost and found, slightly too short but functional. He held it between his knees. Patricia Horn came back and knelt in front of him again. Mr. Webb, your son is on his way. The officer responsible has been suspended. I give you my word that what happened today will have real consequences. She paused. Is there anything I can get you right now? Clarence was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the water in his hands. Then he looked up at her, and he said the thing that would become the center of everything that followed. I appreciate that, Patricia. I truly do. But I need you to tell me something honest. What happens to the next man who doesn't have a son who's the chief? Horn didn't answer right away, because the answer was heavy. And Clarence Webb had just placed it in her hands with the gentleness of a man who had been carrying it his whole life. Reverend Samuel Briggs's hands were steady when he handed his phone to his daughter that evening. He had driven home from the corner of Sycamore and Birch with the recording saved in 3 separate places: the phone's internal storage, his cloud backup, and a video file he had airdropped to his wife the moment he pulled into his driveway. He was a man who had lived long enough to know that important things had a way of disappearing when powerful people decided they should. His daughter, Kezia, 24 years old and fluent in every platform that mattered, uploaded the video at 7:11 p.m. She titled it the same way on every platform, word for word: Officer handcuffs 76-year-old black man on a public sidewalk for walking to a corner store. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all of them, simultaneously, within 4 minutes of each other. By 9 p.m., the video had 180,000 views. By midnight, it had crossed 700,000. By Sunday morning, less than 36 hours after Kezia hit upload, it had 3.4 million. The video was 8 minutes and 52 seconds long. It captured everything from the moment Simmons stepped out of the patrol car to the moment the rear door of the squad car closed behind Clarence Webb. It captured the cane being thrown. It captured the notebook dropped into the puddle. It captured the young man blocked from returning the cane. It captured Simmons's body language, his proximity, his hands. It captured Clarence, palms on the brick wall, perfectly still, perfectly calm. And it captured the sound of him crying out when Simmons grabbed his arm. 8 minutes and 52 seconds. That was all it took. Reporter Vanessa Cole at Channel 6 News broke the full story Monday morning at 6:47 a.m. She had spent the entire weekend working. By the time her segment aired, she had the video. She had Harriet Monroe's 911 call. Harriet had called while it was happening, her voice shaking but clear, every word time-stamped and recorded. She had on-camera interviews with 4 eyewitnesses, including the young man in the college sweatshirt and the woman in scrubs. She had the Hartwell PD's official statement, confirming both Simmons and Hutchins had been suspended. And she had the detail that transformed a local story into something the entire country stopped to look at. The man in the video was the father of Hartwell's chief of police. By noon on Monday, every major network was running it: CNN, MSNBC, Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS. The chyrons were nearly identical across all of them, as if the story was so clear it had written its own headline: Officer handcuffs elderly black man on morning walk. The man's son is the police chief. Civil rights organizations issued statements within hours. 3 state legislators called for immediate investigations. The mayor of Hartwell held an emergency press conference and used the word unacceptable 7 times in 11 minutes. The governor's office released a statement before the end of business Monday, saying the state was monitoring the situation and expected full accountability. But the story did not stop at Simmons. Stories like this never stop where they start. The South Carolina State Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation within 48 hours. They started with the arrest itself. The dash cam footage confirmed everything in Reverend Briggs's video and then added more. The audio from inside the patrol car before the stop caught Simmons's words to Hutchins in full. His comments about the neighborhood, about the people in it, about what kind of person walks on that side of a sidewalk. Every word recorded, every word admissible. Then they pulled Simmons's personnel file. The room went quiet when the number came up. 16 prior complaints. 16. Excessive force. Racial profiling. Unlawful detention. Verbal abuse during traffic stops. Intimidation of witnesses. 16 complaints filed by 16 different people across 5 years on the Hartwell force. Every single one had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Every single one had been dismissed, marked insufficient evidence or unsubstantiated, or resolved informally through a conversation that left no paper trail and changed nothing. 16 people had raised their hands and said this man is dangerous. 16 times, the system had looked at those raised hands and looked away. Not anymore. Within the first week, 10 of Simmons's previous complainants came forward publicly. They gave their names to Vanessa Cole. They gave their stories to national reporters. They sat in front of cameras and described, in specific and documented detail, what it felt like to be on the other side of Brett Simmons with a badge between you. A 19-year-old college freshman stopped while walking home from the library at 9 p.m. and detained for 40 minutes on the sidewalk outside her own dormitory. A 43-year-old electrician handcuffed in his own driveway during what Simmons had written up as a suspicious vehicle check. The vehicle was the man's own truck, registered in his name, parked in front of his own house. A 67-year-old retired schoolteacher stopped while walking her dog 3 blocks from her home and questioned for 25 minutes about where she lived and whether she could prove it. Different faces, different days, different streets, same officer, same contempt, same pattern. The internal review expanded outward like water finding every crack in a floor. 3 former supervisors who had signed off on the dismissals of Simmons's prior complaints were placed under formal investigation. 2 were still active on the force. 1 had retired 14 months earlier. All 3 were suspended pending review. All 3 had known. The question now being asked, formally on the record, with subpoena authority behind it, was not whether they had known, but why knowing had never been enough. The culture that had protected Brett Simmons for 5 years was being examined in daylight for the first time. And daylight, as it turned out, was not kind to it. The trial date was set for 60 days out. And every morning between now and then, Clarence Otis Webb would be in his garden on Pinewood Drive, watering his marigolds, listening to the wind chime Dorothy had made with her own hands, drinking his black coffee, and waiting for the truth to finish finding its way out. He had told her it always would. She had been right. The Hartwell County Courthouse had been standing since 1923. Its steps were worn smooth in the center from a century of feet. Lawyers and defendants and witnesses and families and reporters and citizens who came because they needed to see for themselves that the thing called justice was still happening inside that building and had not quietly moved away while nobody was looking. On the morning the trial began, those steps were covered with people an hour before the doors opened. Judge Raymond Taft presided, 61 years old, 22 years on the bench, the kind of judge who ran a courtroom the way a good principal runs a school, with absolute clarity about who was in charge and absolute seriousness about why that mattered. He had a reputation for 2 things: patience during testimony and 0 patience for anything else. Clarence Webb was in the front row every single morning. New glasses, wire-framed, a replacement pair his granddaughter had helped him pick out. His cane, his own this time, the proper one, retrieved from the sidewalk by Harriet Monroe on the morning of the arrest and kept safe on her porch until he came home. His good jacket, pressed, both hands folded in his lap, back straight. Chief Dominic Webb sat beside him. Every morning, he had recused himself from every departmental decision connected to the case. That was the right thing, and he knew it without being told. But he was here as a son. That was not a role he was recusing himself from. They did not speak much during the sessions. They didn't need to. Sometimes Dominic would put his hand briefly over his father's between witnesses. That was enough. The prosecution's case was methodical and airtight. Dash cam footage, Reverend Briggs's video, Harriet Monroe's 911 recording, medical records documenting the swollen right wrist, the bruising on the upper arm, the abrasion on Clarence's right palm from the brick wall, and the documented aggravation of pre-existing arthritis in both wrists consistent with tight restraint application. Sergeant Abrams's testimony, delivered carefully, in full, every detail, about the condition Clarence was in when he arrived at the station and the sequence of events with the identification. And the personnel file. All 16 complaints, read into the record one by one, each one its own small documented story of a pattern that had been visible for years to anyone who had chosen to look. The defense tried. Simmons's attorney was competent and working hard with very little. He called it a lawful investigative stop. He argued officer discretion. He argued that the arrest was a reasonable response to a subject who had refused to comply with lawful commands. He called into question the reliability of civilian video footage taken from a distance. The prosecution played the dash cam audio. The courtroom heard Simmons's voice from inside the patrol car, before he had stepped out, before Clarence Webb had said a single word. The jury heard what Simmons said to Hutchins. They heard the exact words. They heard the tone. They heard the 4 seconds of silence after the words, and then Simmons putting the car in drive. 3 jurors in the front row stopped taking notes. When the audio finished, the courtroom was very still. Simmons took the stand on the 4th day. His attorney had advised strongly against it. The advice was not taken. He was composed during direct examination. He spoke clearly. He used the word procedure 11 times. He used the phrase officer safety 7 times. He referred to Clarence throughout as the subject, never by name, never as Mr. Webb, never as anything that acknowledged him as a specific human being with a specific life on a specific street where he had lived for 38 years. Cross-examination began at 10:14 a.m. By 10:31 a.m., he had contradicted his own written report twice. The first contradiction was about the sequence of events during the pat-down. The second was about when exactly he had decided to make the arrest. His report said before the subject became verbally resistant. His testimony said after. They could not both be true. The prosecutor did not comment on this. She simply moved on and let the jury sit with it. Then she asked him about the notebook. Simmons said he had removed it as part of a standard search of accessible pockets for weapons or contraband. She asked him why he had dropped it in the standing water, rather than placing it on the vehicle or the ground beside the puddle, as standard procedure required. He said he had not noticed the water. She entered into evidence Reverend Briggs's video, cued to the specific moment. The jury watched Simmons look directly at the puddle before dropping the notebook into it. Frame by frame, if necessary. He said he had not noticed the water. Nobody in the jury box wrote anything down for the rest of that answer. Then she asked the question the whole room had been waiting for. Officer Simmons, if the driver of that vehicle had been a white man of the same age, 76 years old, walking the same route to the same corner store on the same street where he had lived for 38 years, would you have made that stop? 4 seconds of silence. The kind of silence that is not empty. The kind that is completely full. The stop was based on observed behavior, not on the race of the subject. The jury had heard the dash cam audio. They knew what observed behavior meant in that car before he opened the door. Deliberation took 3 hours and 18 minutes. The foreperson stood. The courtroom did not move. Guilty. All counts. Assault on a senior citizen. False arrest. Violation of civil rights under color of law. Filing a false police report. The room did not erupt. It did not cheer. It exhaled. The long, collective exhale of people who have been holding their breath for something overdue and have finally been given permission to breathe again. Judge Taft delivered the sentence 1 week later. He spoke for 4 minutes. Every sentence precise. Every word chosen. Officer Simmons, you were given a badge and trusted with the safety of every citizen in this community. You used that badge as an instrument of humiliation against a man whose only offense was walking on a public sidewalk. You fabricated charges to protect yourself from the consequences of your own conduct. And you did so believing, as you had believed 16 times before, that the system would absorb what you had done and ask no further questions. You were wrong. 8 years. Riverbend Correctional Facility. No possibility of early parole for the first 5. Hutchins. 18 months suspended sentence. 500 hours community service. Permanently and irrevocably barred from law enforcement in any capacity anywhere in the United States. Both banned from the profession. Permanently. The door closed and locked behind them. Clarence sat in the front row. He did not clap. He did not speak. He closed his eyes and was still for a long moment. The stillness of a man setting something down that he has been carrying for a very long time. Then he opened his eyes and looked at his son beside him and nodded once. Dominic nodded back. That was everything. That was enough. April came to Pinewood Drive the way it always did, quietly, without announcement. Just a morning when the air smelled different, and the light through the pine trees had shifted from the flat gray of winter to something warmer. Something that suggested the world had made a decision to continue. The redbuds along the street bloomed pink and pale purple. Their petals drifted across the sidewalks in the early mornings, settling in the cracks and collecting along the iron fences and the curb edges. The mockingbird that lived in the oak tree at the end of the block had returned and was working through its full repertoire from before sunrise. Cardinal, blue jay, red-tailed hawk, something nobody could identify but everybody liked. Clarence Webb was on his front porch at 7:30 a.m., black coffee, jazz on the kitchen radio, drifting out through the screen door, his cane leaning against the porch railing beside him. His own cane, the right height, the worn handle fitted to his grip. His new glasses on his face, both shoes on his feet, no bruises on his arms, no red rings on his wrists. Across the street, Harriet Monroe came out of her front door with her morning tea. She looked over. Clarence raised his coffee cup slightly in her direction. She raised her tea. 30 years of friendship contained in a gesture so small and so complete that it needed nothing added to it. Some things do not change. Some things should not. 4 blocks north, at the corner of Pinewood and Grant, something new stood in front of the Hartwell Community Center. A stone base, waist-high, with a bronze plaque mounted on its face. The lettering was clean and evenly spaced, and it caught the morning light in a way that made it visible from half a block away. The Clarence Otis Webb Community Dignity Initiative. Because every person on every street deserves to be treated as a human being. The City Council had voted on it unanimously. Not 6-1. Not 5-2. Unanimously. Every hand. No discussion required after the first reading. What the initiative had built into law in Hartwell over the past 6 months was not symbolic. It was structural. a civilian oversight board with binding authority to review and act on complaints against officers. Not advisory, not consultative, binding. Mandatory body cameras on every officer, every shift, no exceptions, and no discretion. A complete rebuild of de-escalation training at the academy level. Mandatory refresher courses annually for every officer currently on the force. And a new early warning system, an actual system with triggers and thresholds and automatic review requirements, designed specifically to flag officers with accumulating complaints before those complaints became somebody's worst morning on a sidewalk somewhere. The 3 supervisors who had signed off on the dismissal of Simmons's 16 prior complaints were gone. 2 had been terminated following the internal review. The third, the one who had retired 14 months before everything came apart, was the subject of a separate federal investigation for obstruction of a civil rights complaint process. His retirement had not moved him beyond the reach of what he had signed his name to. Brett Simmons was in a cell at Riverbend Correctional Facility. His appeals had been denied twice in 6 months, once at the state level, once at the circuit level. His name had been entered permanently into the federal civil rights violation database. No police department in the United States could hire him. No law enforcement agency at any level. The door that badge had opened for him was closed, and it would not open again. Dale Hutchins reported every morning at 8 a.m. to the Hartwell Senior Wellness Center on Elm Avenue to complete his 500 hours of court-ordered community service. He helped elderly residents with their morning meals. He walked them to their physical therapy appointments. He sat with those who had no visitors and read the newspaper aloud to those whose eyes had gotten too tired for the small print. Every single day, he served people the same age as the man he had watched being handcuffed on a sidewalk while he sat in a patrol car with his hand on a door handle he never opened. Judge Taft had designed it that way, deliberately, precisely. The irony was not incidental. It was the point. Dominic Webb came to Pinewood Drive every Sunday. He parked in the driveway, came up the porch steps, and sat in the second rocking chair, the one that had been there since before he could remember, the one his mother used to sit in on summer evenings with a glass of sweet tea and a library book. They sat together as the afternoon turned toward evening, the jazz radio on inside, the wind chimes singing above their heads. Dominic talked about the new policies, the new training cohort coming through the academy, the officers who were learning a different way of being in a community, not as occupiers, not as owners, but as members. He talked about the complaints that were now being taken seriously instead of filed and forgotten. He talked about the difference it was already making. Clarence listened. He nodded. He drank his coffee, and then, at some point in the evening, the way he always did, he said the thing he had been saying to Dominic since the boy was 12 years old and first started talking about wanting to wear a badge someday. Power is not what you can do to people. It's what you choose not to do. Dominic always wrote it down afterward, in his own notebook, on the inside cover. On a Saturday morning in late April, Clarence finished his coffee, set the cup on the porch railing, picked up his cane and started down the steps. He turned left on Pinewood, then left again on Sycamore. 3 blocks. The same cracks in the same sidewalk. The same tree roots that had gotten worse this year and needed watching. The same mockingbird in the same oak tree running through its repertoire. He walked on the left side of the sidewalk, the way he always had. He pushed open the door of Deacon's corner store. The bell above the door rang. The man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Morning, Mr. Webb. The usual?" "Please, Tom," Clarence said. "And a pack of peppermints if you have them." He paid for his newspaper and his coffee and his peppermints and walked back out into the April morning. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, tilting his face up toward the light coming through the pines. Then he walked home. His street. The same street it had always been. The same street it would continue to be. The street where he had raised a son and buried a wife and grown a garden and known his neighbors' names for 38 years. He belonged here. He had always belonged here. And now there was a bronze plaque 4 blocks away, catching the morning light, visible from half a block, bearing his name to ensure that the city understood that clearly, officially, permanently. He came through the iron gate, up the porch steps, and sat back down in his chair. The wind chime sang above him. Dorothy had been right. She was usually right. The truth always finds its way out. Some people spend their whole lives being told, in 100 different ways, some loud and some quiet, that they don't belong. That the street beneath their feet isn't theirs. That the space they occupy is provisional, subject to revision, dependent on someone else's patience. Clarence Webb walked on the left side of his sidewalk for 38 years. He watered his marigolds. He tutored his neighbors' children. He attended every ceremony and clapped the loudest. He did not ask the world to acknowledge him. He simply refused to disappear. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what it made you feel. The conversation matters. And if you believe that dignity should not depend on who your son is, subscribe, because there are more stories here that need to be told.